Good evening. Good evening. I'm just going to say a few, I know we're a couple minutes after 7, I'm just going to say a couple logistical words given the size of the crowd tonight. Thank you all for being here. If you have not yet found a place to sit in the sanctuary, and it looks to me like we maybe have a couple over here, maybe a couple right here. We also have seating in the narthex, and we have a live feed of the sanctuary in the Learning Center. And if you go that direction, straight past the stairway, where Jerry is waving there, people can direct you to that. You'll be able to see and hear everything in there in a comfortable seat. So I hope everyone can find a place to sit. And before I begin the formal introduction, I'm also going to mention that a set of keys was found in the Oakwood parking lot, which you don't have to come up and get them now. I will have them after the event. Again, they were found in Oakwood, so come and see me following the event if you'd like to drive back home. Good evening.
Good evening.
I'm Pastor Tim Westermeyer, one of the pastors here at St. Philip Deacon, and on behalf of St. Philip Deacon and Mount Olivet, both of which jointly present the Faith and Life Lecture Series, it is my extreme privilege and pleasure to welcome you here tonight. I want to say thank you to all of you for being here on a beautiful night when you could be watching the exciting vice presidential debate. Thank you for that shout out. Just about a word about the flow for the evening. You'll hear from our speaker, of course, for about 45 or 50 minutes. She has given me permission, by the way, to tackle her if she starts going long. So if you hear me yelling at her, it's because she invited me to do that. After that, you will have a chance to ask her some questions. We've got a couple of microphones here, so be thinking about the kinds of questions you'd like to ask her during that period. And then, of course, following the event, her newest book, which just came out in the last month or so, will be available for sale. Some of you maybe have already picked it up in the narthex, where she will be willing to sit and inscribe it for you. Tonight is a really special night in the history of the Faith and Life Lecture Series. This is the start of our 10th annual season. Which is a wonderful milestone. When it started 10 years ago, I think we had 125 people or so, and it was a fabulous event. And we have since then had event after event after event, which have been equally wonderful. One of those events was particularly good, and that was with the speaker you're going to hear from tonight. She was with us 2 years ago, almost exactly, October of 2010. Since then, a lot of things have happened in her life. We would like to think that it's all a result of her coming to speak here. She went off and did a PBS series. She did a TED Talk, actually a couple of TED Talks now, which have had something like a gajillion views on them. She has written this other book, which I mentioned, Daring Greatly, which, and by the way, if you would turn off your cell phones, that would be great. Daring Greatly, which just this week reached #1 on the New York Times bestseller book list.
Crazy.
Your presence here tonight and the fact that I have gotten about 1 billion emails from people like you asking about her coming since March of last year is an indication of how much people love her and how they respond to her. Will you help me welcome Brene Brown?
Thank you. Hi. I'm nervous. I'm really nervous. There are a lot of you. I'm really excited to be here. I'm excited to be back. When I got the invitation from Tim, it was a no-brainer. I really love it here. It feels like home to me. So thank you for having me back. I thought I would start, I can move around. Oh, free. I'm a walker. I thought I would start by sharing with you the story behind Daring Greatly and kind of where the idea of this book came from and where the title came from. The truth is, it came from a really hard and dark place in my life. I was not prepared for what happened after I left here. I was here in October. I had done the TED Talk in Houston in June. And in December, TED.com, the big site, put my TEDx Houston talk online. And it went viral in 30 days. And when I gave that talk, it was an experiment. I gave it in Houston to 500 people. I swear to you, I don't remember signing any kind of video release. I'm fairly sure I didn't. And I knew 100 of the 500 people. And so I thought, I'm going to try something new. I'm studying vulnerability. I'm learning about vulnerability. I'm going to try, against my better judgment, try being vulnerable while I'm talking about vulnerability. And I'm going to tell the truth about some of my own experiences. So you can only imagine when this goes viral, I can't stop it. And it was really a very difficult period in my life for a couple reasons. The first reason I think it was so hard is that it made me realize in a very painful way that even though I was doing a lot of pissing and moaning about not being able to get my work out to a larger audience, I was very, very controlling with my career in terms of engineering myself to stay small. I was working very hard without even knowing it, making sure that my work stayed very, very small. Which was a weird thing to discover about myself, but the harder part of it was I was doing that really to avoid criticism and to avoid judgment and to avoid, if you just keep talking to like-spirited people, it's awesome. Yeah, which is why I love this series, because that's not your goal, right? The goal is conversations. Yeah. And so I did that a lot. I like spirited people. I had a very, people who followed my blog, people I talked to. You had to kind of check in first to make sure, you're going to like what I'm going to say, right? Okay, you can come on in. This, I had no control over, and it went everywhere. And there was a very difficult week where I felt like everywhere I turned, there I was. In every magazine, in every newspaper, and every time I turned on my computer, there were horrific things being said. Really hard things. Things like, I would embrace imperfection if I looked like Brene Brown too. I feel sorry for her kids. And I talk about my kids in my work. I do actually vet every story that I tell you. We sit down at the dinner table and we say, I'm thinking about using this story. What do you think? No, yes, maybe. Can you do that? So I do that. But because I do talk about my kids, people knew my kids, are Ellen and Charlie. So people would say, I feel sorry for Ellen and Charlie, So it was really painful. So what happened one day is I sent the kids off to school. Steve left for work. I stayed in my pajamas. I got my blanket. I got on the couch, and I watched 14 hours of Downton Abbey. Anybody else, folks? Yeah. I'm not even going to tell you big Downton Abbey fans that a really good friend of mine in London I've got all the new ones on my computer. All I can say is, no one messes with your heads like the Brits. So I'm watching Downton Abbey, and you know how when you use television for numbing, and it's over, and you don't want it to be over? I didn't want to leave Downton Abbey. I didn't want to come back to Houston to Little League practice and soccer and pick up the cleaning and go to the grocery store. And so after I turned it off, I opened my computer, and I'm like, I wonder where exactly Downton Abbey is, and I wonder what's going on. I'm reading about the characters. Have you ever done this, where you're so absorbed with something? And so, luckily, bad history, I think to myself, what's going on in the U.S. when all this stuff is going down in Downton Abbey? So I Google Roosevelt, because I figured he was probably president, 1910. And what comes up is a speech that he gave in 1910 at the Sorbonne called Citizenship in the Republic. And so I read the entire speech, and in it is this phrase, it is this passage. It's not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who's actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who at best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly. And it changed me. I mean, it changed me. There was like plates shifting within me when I read that. And I thought to myself, this is who I want to be. I don't want to stand outside of the arena anymore wondering, what would it be like if I went in? What would it be like if I showed up in my life and really let myself be seen? Like, I want to be the person in the arena who is probably getting their ass kicked sometimes. Because if you go in, it's going to happen. Period. Like, there's no one that ever goes in that comes out like, woohoo, every time. You go in, you're going to crawl out on occasion. You know, and I thought, this is what I want to be. I want to be in the arena. I want to be all in. The other thing is, I kept reading this passage over and over. I thought to myself, this is everything I have ever learned about vulnerability. You know, I've studied and thought about vulnerability for a dozen years, and this is everything I've learned about it. Vulnerability is not winning, it's not losing, it's showing up and being seen. And I said, this is it. I'm gonna write up everything I've learned about vulnerability, and I'm gonna call it Daring Greatly, because that's what I think vulnerability is. And what's interesting to me is, in 12 years of research, 11,000 pieces of data, I cannot find a single example of courage. Not one example of courage. Moral courage, spiritual courage, leadership courage. Not one example of courage that was not born of vulnerability. I mean, think about the last time you did something brave, or the last time you saw someone do something brave. If you look, you will always find vulnerability there. When we, and I think the problem is, that we think in this culture that vulnerability is weakness. We think that I'm not going to let you see me, I'm not going to let you hurt me, and I'm not going to let you know me. Because if you know me, you can hurt me. If you see me, you might see something you don't like. And we will go to incredible lengths to avoid judgment and criticism and blame. And so what I want to talk about tonight is, I want to talk about the myths of vulnerability, the things that keep us, I think, outside of the arena. And the first one is the biggest one, is the myth that vulnerability is weakness. So one of the things that we did is we asked people, what is vulnerability? We just said, what is it? And here are the answers that we got, just some random samples. Vulnerability is my first date after my divorce. Vulnerability is saying I love you first. Vulnerability is starting my own business. Vulnerability is trying to get pregnant after my second miscarriage. Vulnerability is sitting with my wife, who's got stage 4 breast cancer, and trying to make plans for our kids. Vulnerability is telling our CEO that we're not going to make payroll this month. It's getting laid off. It's laying off somebody. Vulnerability is coming back up to bat after you struck out. A parent who said vulnerability is knowing how excited my son is to try out for orchestra and how badly he wants to make the first chair. And being excited for him and sending him to school with all of our best wishes and knowing that's not going to happen. That's vulnerability. And there's no equation where showing up like that in our lives is weakness. Vulnerability feels like courage, and it sounds like truth. And it's not weakness. I think it's our most accurate measure of courage. Are you willing to sit down across from someone and put it on the line? You know, one of the questions that I get all the time is, people say, you know, in interviews, they'll say, oh, daring greatly, this is a bad idea right off the bat. I looked over in his eyes, that's not daring greatly, that's just dumb. That people say to me all the time, yeah, I thought it was gonna be like anyway, but I tried it, it didn't work out. People say to me all the time, so is daring greatly like jumping out of a plane with a parachute? Is it rock climbing? Is it, you know, cliff diving? To me, those are easy compared to vulnerability. I'm gonna tell you a story of vulnerability. A hard story, a personal story. This summer, I have to get ready for this one. Get my brave on. So this summer, we're at Lake Travis in Austin, where we spend a couple of weeks for vacation. And it's me, Steve, our kids, my sisters, their families. We're staying in a big house. You go down these steep stairs, there's a dock, and we're on a cove in Lake Travis. I don't have to explain lakes to you here, right? There you go. Y'all are clear on lakes and mosquitoes, yes? And so it's really great because from the dock across the cove and back is about 800 yards. And Steve and I are both ex-swimmers. We met coaching swimming. And so every morning when the sun was coming up and every evening at dusk, Steve and I would leave the kids with my sisters and we would go swim together. We'd swim the 800 yards. And we've been together 25 years, and it's been 25 years since we've ever done that together. You know, I mean, it was just, so one evening, we're out there, we swim across, we get about halfway across, we kind of stop, and you know, you have to kind of look for boats, because boats are coming back and forth. And I turned to him and I said, this is really special. I love this. And he goes, yeah, it's good. So I don't think anything of it. So I just keep swimming. We get to the other side, kind of panting. We sit on a rock for a minute. I said, God, it's been a long time since we've been swimming together, right? And he said, yeah. And I said, it's pretty cool. I mean, it brings back memories, doesn't it? Said, yeah, it's good. So I'm in that space between, is it me or, you know? So we start swimming back. We get halfway back. I kind of look at him, and I smile, kind of like, hey. And he's like, what's that? Like, so we get back to the dock, and my feelings are hurt, which I don't really do hurt feelings. Like, I just go straight to pissed off. I skip right over hurt feelings. Because I like my emotions with a little agency. So I asked him the question that's probably started more fights between couples than any other question ever asked, because it's so passive aggressive. And you're trying to put it out there as super benign, but it's not. I go, you're acting really weird. Is something going on? Which, have you ever seen this question end well? Right. It's the beginning of every fight ever. So he goes, no, everything's good. So I'm like, and it's like 30 feet at the dock, so I'm like dog paddling, I'm tired. I said, because I feel like I'm trying to connect. Like I'm being touchy-feely. I'm trying to like say this is awesome, and you're like, whoa, whatever. And he's like, no, it's good. So I'm like, the way I was trying to think it, I was trying to make it more grammatically correct, but what I was really thinking is, you're fixing to pay. Like, it's gonna be a very long 3 or 4 hours. Because you won't even know what you did, because nothing weird is going on. So, how many therapists here? Raise your hand, I wanna know where you are. They only look normal from the outside. So I hang out with a lot of therapists because it's a job hazard for me. My best friends are therapists. And so I channel my therapist friends, and I decide I'm going to dare greatly. I'm going to be brave. So I say, I can barely say it with a straight face, but I did then. The story that I'm making up about what's happening right now is that you either you saw me swimming and you think, oh my God, she's got a terrible freestyle stroke now, or you're thinking to yourself, man, she didn't look like she looked in her Speedo 25 years ago. Because I brought a Speedo to swim, to work out, and that's not, come on. At this age, you're all about the miracle suit. Right? You count on the cleavage and that kind of stuff. You don't do the racing suit on purpose, right? But I brought it because I knew we would be working out. So I said, the story I'm making up right now about everything is that, you don't like me, you think I look bad in my bathing suit, you think my freestyle's gone to hell. And he said, what? And I said, no, really, I'm just telling you that here's what's going on in my head right now about what's happening, because my feelings are hurt. And he said, oh my God, you're being vulnerable, right? Yeah. Yeah. And I said, I am, and it's super uncomfortable. I'm going to drown myself if you don't say something. And he kind of looked away, and I could tell he was in struggle, so I kind of stopped joking around for a second. I said, are you okay? And he said, it's not that I mind having the kids all the time while we're here. And I said, what? And he said, whenever we do something in the lake, except when we're floating around by the dock, I have to have all the kids because the other dads don't swim really. And I said, right. And he said, so it's a little bit hard for me. And I said, what do you mean? He said, no, I just get in the middle of this cove. It's 40 feet deep. I've got, Ellen and Lorna are pretty good swimmers. Gabby doesn't swim at all. Charlie's not a great swimmer. And Amaya, is dangerously brave in the water, but doesn't have the skills to back it up. And he said, and I'm out here, and it makes me nervous. And he said, last night I had one of the worst dreams of my life. And I said, what happened? And he said, I dreamt that I was in the middle of the cove, and a boat was coming, and it was just hauling ass. It wouldn't stop. So I grabbed all 5 of the kids, and I pulled them under the water as deep as I could. And the boat just wasn't coming, and I could see Charlie's face, and he couldn't breathe anymore. And I didn't know what to do, because if I went back to the top of the water, I knew we would get hurt. And he said, this morning, I forgot about the dream until I got out in the middle of the cove this morning, and I had an anxiety attack. He said, I was really focusing while I was swimming, trying to keep it together. Because as soon as I got out in the middle and that first boat came by, I thought to myself, I'm not coming back out here with those kids. And it was just this moment of total vulnerability and honesty. Because, for men, shame is about being perceived as weak, right? And it's hard for all of us, but I think especially sometimes for men to say, here's the fear that came up for me. I love having all the kids. I like being in charge of them, but this is really tough. And I said, oh my God, that's fair. How about I'll come out, I'll come out with you if you're going to take the kids across. He said, you don't mind? He said, I know you love talking to your sisters and you don't get that much time with them. I said, no, it's too much to ask you. I should have thought about it. I'm sorry. And he said, does it seem kind of wussy? And I said, no. It doesn't seem wussy. What seems crazy to me is having 5 kids in water that's 40 feet deep, where boats come hauling by. That's what doesn't sound smart, and I'm so glad you told me. So to me, I'd rather jump out of a plane than have that conversation more than a couple of times. But to me, that's daring greatly. And the moment in that conversation that's daring and vulnerable for me is the moment where I take the risk in believing that I'm worthy of love. And that if I say this is how I'm feeling, I'm going to get back something that confirms that I'm worthy of love. And I think that's what makes vulnerability so hard for us. You know, it is the first thing. How many of you would agree when you meet someone and you're forming a relationship that vulnerability is the first thing you look for in other people? You know, are there cracks? Are these people real? So it's the first thing we look for in other people, and the last thing we're willing to show them in us. In other people, it's courage. In us, it's weakness. So that first myth that vulnerability is weakness just doesn't bear out. And for me, very honestly, my faith is the guiding principle in my life. My faith informs my values, and it informs the decisions I make about my life. And to me, there is something deeply unholy about questioning our worthiness and our lovability. And there is something incredibly sacred about acknowledging that our worthiness is our birthright. And that if he looked back at me and said, yeah, you really don't look like you used to in that Speedo, it was pretty tough or something on the eyes. I don't even know what, I can't imagine my husband saying that, but in those situations, because I'm sure there are people sitting here today saying, I don't know that conversation would go like that with my boyfriend or my girlfriend or my partner. That is not your stuff. Your worthiness is non-negotiable. And I don't think we can be vulnerable without some way of being firmly planted in what we believe. I walk into the arena, I try to walk into the arena, I try to teach my kids to walk into the arena because I feel like it's not my right, but it's my responsibility. Because the world needs the contributions that we all have to make, the gifts. And I don't believe in a punitive God, but I don't think unused gifts are benign. I don't think they just dissipate. I think the gifts that we're given need to be used for us to feel good about who we are. The second myth, is how many lawyers here? You can keep your hands up a lot. We see you. Are y'all friends? Do y'all know each other? What other lawyers? Oh, you're outing her. Nice. He wasn't going like this, he was going like this. Are you married to her? You'll be talking later. Yeah. How many engineers in here? Oh, I thought you were the same one who raised your hand for a lawyer. I was like, oh my God, you're a double threat. I'm saying this because the second myth is that I don't do vulnerability. People actually believe they can opt out of it. And normally, the biggest two professions, usually there's a disclaimer when people say, oh, neat book, I don't do vulnerability. Or nice topic, I don't do vulnerability. They always give a disclaimer, and it's usually professional, and it's usually, I don't do vulnerability, I'm a lawyer. We eat vulnerability for lunch. Or I don't do vulnerability, I'm an engineer. I don't know what that is thematically, but lawyers and engineers have a tendency to really use their professions to explain that they don't do vulnerability. And in fact, a very good friend of mine who is an engineer for NASA, am I allowed to say the S word, but quietly? I'll bleep it out. Yeah. No, because it's a direct quote. Otherwise, you know me, I wouldn't cuss at all. No, a very good friend of mine who's an engineer for NASA, when we were talking about it, he said, I don't do vulnerability, I'm an engineer. And he said, when I'm vulnerable, people die. I was like, what? And he goes, no, really, when I'm vulnerable, shit falls out of the sky. I was like, that is a lot of pressure. And I live in Houston, so actually I thought for a second, don't be vulnerable. Just keep it together. Here's the definition of vulnerability. Vulnerability is, this is 3 words, 4 words. Uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. That's what vulnerability is. It's uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. To be alive is to be vulnerable. To be in relationship is to be vulnerable. To be in business is to be vulnerable. To work with people. I don't know, some of the people that I've learned the most from, ironically, about vulnerability are lawyers who are really trained to recognize vulnerability and how they do that. I mean, my dad's a lawyer. Lots of lawyers in my family. I love them. We can't opt out of vulnerability. So the question is, if you don't believe you do vulnerability, if you think, I don't do it, then I would ask you to ask yourself, what do you do when you feel completely uncertain? How do you respond to feeling exposed emotionally? Like, what is your go-to thing? Is it pleasing? Is it perfectionism? Is it performing? Is it rage? Is it control? What do you do when you're in that torture chamber that we call uncertainty? You know, what is your reaction to it? Because if you don't think you do vulnerability, then more than likely vulnerability is doing you. It is showing up in your life some way that you don't know. And if you're not awake to how it's happening, the behaviors we engage in to deal with vulnerability are usually not ones that move us toward outcomes that we want. Like for me, before this research happened, I would say, I'm sure I've said 1,000 times I don't do vulnerability. And I usually say I don't do vulnerability, I'm a researcher. Which the irony is that I'm a vulnerability researcher, but you have to be Freud to figure that out. But I think when I look back, what I would do is I would control things. And so now, you know, people say, okay, I want to be more vulnerable. I want to show up in my life. What do? The first step is figure out what your armor is. Figure out how you protect yourself from feeling vulnerable. Like for me, one of the biggest red flags is how many of you practice really mean, cruel conversations with people? You? That's against the rules or something. No, really, that's like, this is not, like, I'm gonna ask again. How many of you find yourself driving away from situations or lying in bed at night practicing really mean conversations with people? Okay. Liars. Okay. Is it because we're in a church? Are they allowed to raise their hands? Yeah, you should raise your hands. How many of you have driven away from a situation or thought about something and just practiced the cruelest thing you could say? I'm going to ask one more time. All right. Now we're talking. Well, I don't know what's wrong with y'all. No. So I have a 13-year-old. Ellen's 13, Charlie's 7. And so Ellen's having the mean girl middle school issue. God, raising a middle schooler is hard. And it's hard because inside of all of us is a middle schooler who is alive and well, sweaty palmed, heavy tray, and nowhere to sit. She lives right in here. She's got on leg warmers and a perm and big bangs, and she's listening to Rush. For all you clappers, I want you to know I did just get my Rush tickets. Ellen, I'm going actually with one of Ellen's friends' parents. Steve and I are going. This is our 5th concert and their 4th concert. And Ellen goes, oh my God, y'all are not going to Instagram pictures of yourself at the concert, are you? I'm like, yes, and then we're going to post them at your school. Like, no, so Ellen's having mean girl problems. So I knew that I was in vulnerability when I was lying in bed practicing the conversation I was going to have with one of these girls' mothers. And this is what it was. Hey, how are you? How's it going? Good. Listen, I came across some really interesting data. So right off the bat, I got my big armor on, my big Brene Brown, PhD. I'm, like, right, okay. So I came across some really interesting data. I know the girls are having some struggles at school, but what's interesting, I find, in this new research is it seems that really kind of mean-spirited, gossipy, cruel girls seem to have really mean-spirited, gossipy, cruel mothers. I'm actually lying in bed practicing this. And I throw off the covers. Of course, my husband goes, "Are you having a hot flash?" My poor husband is threatening to buy one of those camping hand warmers because I have the air conditioning on like 63. And it's really not, I don't think they're hot flashes. It's just I practice a lot of cruelty at night when I'm lying in bed. I do. These are the conversations I want to have. But what's very helpful about them, per my therapist, is that I can use them as a red flag. I don't actually use them to rehearse. I don't actually say these things to people. But what happens when I'm doing that, when I told Steve, no, I'm practicing what I'm going to say to this person's mom. And he's like, okay, so let me make sure I understand. Like, this is where you practice it, but then you know that you're not going to say it in real life. Like, right. So the question is, what do you do in those situations when you don't know? You know, what do you do when you feel uncertain and exposed? When you feel like you could get hurt? When you feel like, you know, your partner is up against layoffs at work? You're waiting for your mammogram results. You know, we all do something. How many of you, when something like that happens, you just end up in the pantry? Yes or no? Like, you don't even know how you got to the pantry. But you're in the pantry. You're like, peanut butter. So we have to figure it out. The third myth, and this is where people say, we don't need more vulnerability. We have too much vulnerability. Oh my God, please do not advocate for more vulnerability. Do you see the way people just share anything and everything everywhere? Right? Do you agree? I agree. So let me go on the record and say, I've said this all over the country now, so I think it's going to be clearly at some point, live tweeting your bikini wax is not vulnerability. Pictures of yourself, you know, in your new outfit, not vulnerability. Posting your child's emotional responses to your divorce on Facebook, not vulnerability. Vulnerability is about trust, it's about intimacy, it's about connection. We share our stories with people who've earned the right to hear them. We share our stories with people with whom we have relationships that can bear the weight of the story. Where am I with time? Okay, 10 minutes, yeah. I'm gonna start talking really fast. No. So let me tell you a little bit about the relationship between trust and vulnerability. Because people often say, I want to be vulnerable, but how do I trust someone? How do I know that I can, you know, be vulnerable and share my story with them? I think the hard thing about vulnerability and trust is it's a little chicken egg, right? Like if Tim and I are new friends and I say, well, do I trust you enough to share something vulnerable with you? And then how can I learn to trust you if I haven't shared anything vulnerable with you? It's that story. And so in the book, how many of you have read the book and have read the marble jar story? It's like one of my favorite stories. Ellen comes home from school one day. This is how I talk about trust now. 3rd grade, distraught, sobbing, because she has had her first experience of betrayal. She confides something to one of her little friends at recess. By lunch, all the girls in the class know. They're laughing and giggling and pointing at her, and she's devastated. So she comes home, she's crying, and she tells me, I will never trust anyone again. I will never share another story with anybody again. And of course, my first response is, damn straight. Like, you tell mama your stories. And when you get older, you can keep telling me, because wherever you go to college, mama's going to get an apartment. And then you'll always have someone to tell your stories to. So I'm trying to figure out how to talk to her about trust. And she says, it was so bad in class that Mrs. Bauckham, and I'll use her real name because she was just this awesome third grade teacher, Miss Bauckham took marbles out of the marble jar. And so Miss Bauckham had this great big jar, like kind of like a glass flower vase, and a big bag of marbles, and every time the kids made collectively good choices, she'd put marbles in the marble jar. And every time the kids made bad choices as a group, she'd take marbles out of the marble jar. When the marble jar filled to the top, there would be a class party. Very straight cognitive behavioral reward system, right? So she said it was so bad, the girls were laughing so hard, Miss Bauckham took marbles out of the marble jar. And she said, I just don't know how to trust people. And I thought, you know what? It's the marble jar, Ellen. It's the over time you make friends, and when they do things to earn your trust and earn your respect, you put marbles in their jar. And when you fill that jar up with marbles, that's the people you can trust. Do you have any marble jar friends? Friends who are full of marbles? And she said, I do. Lorna and Hannah are my marble jar friends. And this is where it got really interesting. I said, tell me some of the things that they do to earn marbles, in your opinion. When do you put marbles in their marble jar in your heart? And she said, when Oma and Opa, my parents, when Oma and Opa come to my soccer game, and Hannah looks up and says, hey, look, Oma and Opa are here, I put marbles in. And I didn't even get it. I was like, what do you mean? She goes, no, it's just neat. I mean, I have a lot of grandparents, and it's really cool that Hannah remembers that their names are Oma and Opa. And I said, that is really important. I thought, that's a small, weird thing, but it's really important. And then I said, what else? And she said, well, sometimes if I miss school, Lorna asks her mom to call you to find out where I was and if I'm okay. I was like, yeah. And she said, and sometimes when I get to lunch, if I'm late because I was in the library, they're always saving me a seat. I was like, okay. And she said, so when do you put marbles in your friend's jar? And what I realized as I started to think about it was the exact same things. If I'm in a soccer game with Steve and my parents, and Tim walks in up to the sidelines and says, hey, good to see you. Oh, Deanne, David, good to see y'all. That means something to me. Like, you remembered my parents' names. And I thought, this seems so weird. And the weird thing about grounded theory, which is I'm a grounded theory researcher, we collect our data, we build our theories, then we do the lit review. And so one of the great things is that when I started doing the lit review around trust, I ran right into John Gottman's research on trust and betrayal and attunement. And his first thing is, trust develops in the tiniest, smallest of moments. And he calls them sliding door moments, from the movie Sliding Doors with Gwyneth Paltrow. Have y'all seen this movie? It's a really kind of hardcore movie. I love people my age, because people my age are looking at their partners going, have we seen that? Which I think is a money saver, because if you own it, then you can just watch it again. But it's a movie where the film follows Gwyneth Paltrow up to this moment where she's trying to make a subway to get to go see her boyfriend or something. And she jumps on the subway and the doors close. No, she misses the subway and the doors close and the subway takes off. And the movie splits here and follows two trajectories. One if she would have made the subway, and one when she didn't, that have dramatically different life and death endings. So Gottman calls these trust moments sliding door moments, and he tells one of his own stories in his book. He says that one night he's lying in bed and he's at 10 pages away from the end of a murder mystery. And it's so good that he doesn't even want to finish it until he gets up, goes to the bathroom, brushes his teeth, and gets back in bed. Like, have you ever been at that point in a book, right? I love that point. So he said he puts the book down, he jumps up, he walks into the bathroom, and he walks past his wife, who's in there brushing her hair, who looks tremendously sad. And he said, that's the sliding door moment. What I'm really thinking is, I just want to brush my teeth and get back in bed and figure out who killed all these people. But this is the moment. This is the moment where trust happens. And he said, so I stop, I take the brush out of her hand, I start brushing her hair, and I say, what's going on? You look really sad. What I think is so really incredibly smart about all of his research, all 30 years of it, I'm a fan, is he said, the reason why trust is built in small moments is because embedded in these small moments are bids for connection. They're where we reach out and say, I'm asking for connection right now. You know, at the dock, paddling. Here's a story I'm making up about what's happening right now. Was a bid for connection. And I think every bid for connection is about vulnerability. So if we have a really hard day at work, and we get home, and we get on Facebook and we put, boss sucks, hard day at work. And we get 5 or 6 people who leave comments who say, my boss sucks too, I totally get it, call in sick tomorrow, right on, sorry about your hard day, love you sis, those things. It feels good and it's normalizing, and I'm not going to dismiss its importance. But they're in that communication, there is no bid for connection. There is no vulnerability and there is no risk. It is not the same as picking up the phone and me, I keep picking on you, Tim, because I know you, me picking up the phone saying, hey, Tim, do you have a minute? I had a really hard day. Much more vulnerable, right? But that's where intimacy and trust is built. The last myth that we'll talk about kind of ties into this one, and it's the myth that we can go it alone. That somehow and for some reason in our culture, and I think even in our faith communities, we romanticize this notion of individualism, of doing it on my own. I don't need anybody or anything. And the truth is, we're hardwired for connection. It's why we're here. We're neurobiologically hardwired for love, belonging, and connection. In the absence of these things, there's always suffering. And if we want to start trying to be vulnerable, we need to become very aware of the people in our lives who are in the arena with us. You know, one of the things that we have a tendency to do is steamroll over the 1 or 2 people who love us in order to get the approval and attention of people who don't matter. Like Steve will say, I think you look great. I'm like, I don't care that you think I look great. Why? You're just the father of my children. You're the person who holds my hair back when I get sick and throw up. We pay bills together. We take care of parents together. You're the most important. It's the 20 women who I don't know at the mall. They are the people who matter. What are they going to think about the boots with the jeans? You know? And I think there's kind of this mythology, too, that we have to have a posse of people. Like, we have to have 20 or 30 people. To me, if you have 1 or 2, that's the huge blessing. You know, and to me, that's the center of my faith. There's 2 things. I saw this woman speak about 15 years ago, and I was so struck by what she said. She was talking about criticism, and she said, I have a very short list of people whose opinions matter to me. When people launch into criticism, I just kindly tell them, no, you're not on my list. Which I'm not sure I would do, because as a shame person, I'm like, oh, that could be a little shaming. But I do have a list that I carry in my wallet. And Steve's name's on there. There's 3 names on there that kind of hover on there. And when things are really tough, I pull it out and I look at it. And to me, it's really a sacred list for this reason, that I feel the same way about the people on this list as I feel about my faith. And that is, these are people who don't love me despite my vulnerabilities and my imperfections. These are people who love me because of my vulnerabilities and imperfections. My faith, the way I've negotiated my faith and my relationship with God, is a place where I am loved not despite the fact that I'm a little nutty, but because I'm a little nutty. And to me, the truth is about the criticism part, I've come to a place in my life where my bottom line is this, and it sounds a little harsher than it is, but if you're not in the arena getting your ass kicked on occasion, I'm not interested in your feedback. Period. I'm not open to what you have to say unless you two are in the arena, showing up and trying to be seen. Because if you're a professional, bleacher sitter, I don't think you have anything useful to share with me. And I want criticism. I want you to say, hey, I liked your talk, but you forgot this entire piece of literature on this and this and that. How can you talk about vulnerability without, I just got this email, without examining the literature, academic literature on closeness? I think you've really missed something here that could inform your work. I don't want to miss that. But the thing is, in a culture of reflexive cynicism and kind of projectile criticism, it is easier to criticize than it is to contribute. And that does not align with my values or my faith. And the thing that I think is so important about our faith communities, they have to be a place where we can come and say, I want to try something new. I want to say I love you first. I'll end with this story because I think it's so amazing. I was just turning in the conclusion of the book. I had to call my editor and say, this is the last story for the book. Take out whatever I wrote. This is it. I met this kid, 22, in LA. He says, waits in line to talk to me. He said, my parents sent me your TED Talks. They changed my life. And he said, they convinced me that I should tell my girlfriend that I've been dating for 6 months that I love her. And I'm thinking, oh, God. I really just want to say, that's awesome. Nice to meet you. Okay, so I'm thinking, I hope this went well. And he said, so I took her out on a date, and I looked at her, and I said, I love you. And she put her head down, and she said, you're awesome. I think we should date other people. So he said he drives home the whole way saying this, Brene Brown sucks. No, I hate Brene Brown. This is all crap. I hate her. And he said he gets home. His roommates are his age. He flings the door open. They're both hunched over their laptops. And they're like, what's up? And he said, I told her I loved her and she blew me off. And one of his roommates goes, man, that was stupid. Girls only like you when you're running the other direction. And he said, in that second, he said, I realized, no, that's okay, maybe they do, maybe they don't, but that's not who I want to be. And he said, I looked at him and said, no, man, I was daring greatly. And he said both of his roommates stopped typing and looked up. And one of them went, oh, right on, man. So I'll leave it at that. Thank y'all so much for coming. Would you questions? Yeah. Oh, yeah, I'll take that. Water, thank you. Okay, no problem. Thank you. Okay.
Well, okay.
Thank y'all.
She was worth bringing back, don't you think? We're going to let her rest her voice just for a couple minutes. We are going to do some Q&As. I promise you we will not get to all of the questions that all of you want to ask. I apologize for that in advance, but we don't want to stay till midnight, I don't think. So as I'm making up a couple of announcements, if you want to ask a question, you can make your way to the microphone there or the microphone there. And John, who is standing in the center aisle at the back, also has a roving mic, and he'll try to pick up as many of you as he can as we get to that. In any case, a couple announcements first while she has a glass of water. First thing is the next event. Thursday, November 15th, It's on faith and science, which is a subject we've dealt with a few times over the course of the last 10 years. What I will say about James Hannam is he is from Great Britain, so he will have a British accent.
You have to pay extra for that.
Yeah. He's written a wonderful book called The Genesis of Science. If faith and science is an interest of yours, I encourage you to come to that again, Thursday, November 15th. And by the way, I've said this many times in the past 10 years, but if you would like to have updates about our upcoming events in a way that is very easy and efficient for us to give you, I would encourage you to either give us your email on this green sheet, or you can go to the Faith and Life website and submit your email, or you can like us on Facebook. There are lots of ways we can share information about events, but you can leave these at a variety of places in baskets outside the narthex, or you can bring them to me. Okay, and then I do want to say a word of thanks. You came here tonight, without any cost, and that's because over the last 10 years we have had many, many faithful supporters, both individuals and local corporations and organizations. I'd like to name a few of them. Thrivent Financial for Lutherans Community Crossroads, they have been our longest serving corporate sponsor. Jim, thank you very, very much. Productivity Inc. and Cressa are both local corporations. Cressa is a brand new corporate sponsor. Thank you very much, Jim. TCF Bank Rapid Packaging is another new corporate sponsor this year. Sparky Abrasives, which has actually been with us from the start, but they changed their name this year. And then 3 educational institutions, Luther Seminary, Augsburg Center for Faith and Learning, and McLaurin Institute at the University of Minnesota all partner with us. We're grateful for that support. And then we have some in-kind sponsors, Fuzzy Duck and the Bookcase. And all of the individuals listed there. So you're here thanks to their generosity. Many of them are here. Would you please thank them? And then, again, I just want to thank all of you for being here. It is a real privilege to do these events. I'm grateful that you're willing to come out on a beautiful night. It's not hard to want to when you get to hear people like Brene. But now, this is interesting. The last time you were here, I talked about this with someone. Afterwards, here she talks about vulnerability or the gifts of imperfection, and there is nary a person at any microphone. Okay, here we go.
Woo-hoo!
Thank you.
Let's give her a cheer.
All right, now, we'll do about 10, 15 minutes of Q&A, okay, depending on how things go.
Okay, thank you so much for coming our way. It was a pleasure and an honor. How did you go from being a researcher to such a brilliant and funny speaker that connects so well?
I think that, I gave a lot of talks before the TED Talk, and I gave some, for a long time, my talks were called Variables Predicting Self-Conscious Affect. They weren't super popular. I really think it happened during, one of the things I write about a lot is my kind of breakdown spiritual awakening, where vulnerability first emerged as the key to wholeheartedness, and I really had kind of a breakdown. I really had to put my data away and get a therapist. And really say, oh my God, I became a researcher to avoid vulnerability. Now I have to become vulnerable because this is what we're supposed to do. And I think in that process, I changed completely. Like, I used to never tell stories really about myself or my life. And so I think, because the truth is, and this is hard, as an academic, we're trained that the more accessible we are, the more ashamed we should be. And the smarter we are, the more boring we should be, and pedantic, really. And if we're too accessible, it means we're not smart. And it's really tragic because I feel like there's so many people doing great work that we can't access. So I think it was just an evolution over time, but the watershed moment was TED. After you do that, you can't go back to variables predicting self-conscious affect because people will boo you. It was an experiment gone right. Thank you.
Did you want to alternate or?
Sure. Hi.
Hi. You had talked about the mean girl situation with your daughter, and I think all the women here, and probably some guys have been mean-girled as well. And I'm just wondering, like I'm at a point in my life where I'd like to be more vulnerable and be more open to experiences, but I'm afraid of, we do have this culture of judgment.
Yeah.
And so how do you negotiate that? Like, is this kind of the trust, like a little bit of trust to people who deserve it? Or?
I mean, I do. I think it's some marble jarring. I think it's building, but really, it could be a function of age for me, but I really don't have very many close friends anymore who can't hold space for my vulnerability. Like, at some point, you get to a point where you just say, the people around me, I can't do it anymore. I've hustled as long as I can. And so, but I'm still very boundaried around work situations, but my close friends, I call them, they're my stretch mark friends. They're the people who you don't have to pretend like you don't have stretch marks in front of. They're the people who get it, and they know the shorthand. And I think it's really about making conscious choices. And but I think it's an important question too, because not every one of my friends is a stretch mark friend. I have some friends who are great friends where we do PTO projects together, but I don't share those things. If there's a family crisis brewing in my family, I'm not going to tell them about that. I'm not going to pretend like everything's great, but something powerful happens the moment you realize that it's a privilege for people to hear your story. And so I'm very selective about who I share my stories with. And I think that's what we have to do. We have to have those friends who, if you go into the arena and you're more vulnerable and it doesn't work out, they're friends that'll look at you and say, man, but you were so brave. And you just need one or two. But I think you got to be selective. Thank you.
Well, I struggle with the idea of vulnerability because it seems to me intrinsic to the idea of vulnerability is that you can lose something or be diminished. And I guess my faith in spirituality leads me to believe that I am connected. I yearn for that connection, but I actually have it, and it's only the stories that I tell myself that keep me from experiencing the fullness of that at any given moment. That being the case, what are your thoughts on that? If it seems to me that what you're saying is potentially incompatible with that idea that we do have something to lose, and we are diminished when someone says something to us. But I struggle with that because it's only to the degree that I feel like it's only to the degree that I decide that it can affect me that it does.
I really struggle with that. I want to believe that too. I try to practice that. I try to practice, well, they can only hurt me if I allow them to hurt me. I can only feel diminished. The whole Eleanor Roosevelt quote. What is the quote? People can only put you down if you give them permission to do that. But I don't actually believe that, to be honest with you. I think it's a tightrope. Here's what I think. When I hear people say, I don't really care what people think, a huge red flag goes up for me. Because when we don't care what people think, we lose our capacity for connection.
Well, is it about caring what they think or being able to disengage from the threat of what they're saying, to be able to take potentially what they're saying at face value, but without the idea that it's going to diminish, or like to listen to a critic who you don't know, but they're being very critical of you, and to listen without the idea that what they say can hurt you, but to actually listen for the kernel of whatever they might be sharing that might be true.
So I do think, and I love the kernels, but if the kernels are wrapped in shame or mean-spiritedness, that hurts me. And I have not found a way to open myself to that. I have found the best way that I can do it for me is I'm just not open to it. I want the good feedback and constructive feedback, so I have people sift through that for me. But I think it's overestimating our humanity to think that we can hear really cruel things about us and not be hurt by them. That's my experience. Everyone I know who's kind of in the public eye, or even people who are not in the public eye, I feel like maybe some people are better than others. The problem with thick skin, I guess, for me, is that Thick skin is not optional. When we grow it, things hurt less, but we feel less too. And so it's that wire of being, it's that really hard space of being open to hearing and feeling what people have to say, but not everybody, because it could be hurtful. So I don't know how to do it yet, to be honest. Every day I'm practicing. I mean, really am.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, Brene.
Hi.
You may have answered this question in part just now, but since I've been standing here for a few minutes, I would have felt a lot of shame to go back and sit down, like I would have lost my nerve or something.
You could have just gone like this.
Stomped out.
Then I would have owned all that.
Right.
Yeah, it would have been awesome.
So my question for you has to be, or is around self-soothing.
Yeah.
And I'd like to hear you speak to this idea of when you are vulnerable, even though it sounds like you've got great boundaries now, and people don't respond in a way that you would like them to. So what do you do in those cases? How do you take care of you?
Well, I have like a little mantra thing that I do, where I try to talk to myself the way I would talk to my kids, which I try to be really kind, and I try to practice a lot of self-compassion, but I rely heavily on my short list. I mean, I don't think that we can self-soothe in isolation. You know, I really think that, and to me, this is where I pray a lot. They're PG-13 at best. They're hardcore prayers, but I pray a lot. I talk to my friends and family a lot. I really reach out. I mean, my rule is when I feel that kind of push down, talk to myself the way I talk to someone I love, reach out for connection, and get really prayerful.
Great. And do you feel like you have strengthened yourself, fortified yourself by being vulnerable? The more you do it, the stronger you get.
Oh God, I'm like dangerous now.
Yeah.
No, I am. I feel much more courageous than you know what? It's a great question. Something shifted inside of me the day I realized. I grew up in a family where there was not a lot of vulnerability. Vulnerability was definitely perceived as weakness. I mean, 5th generation Texan, and I say this on the second TED Talk, but it's true. Our family motto, lock and load. I'm not kidding. I think it's on a crest somewhere. So very but when I say no vulnerability in our family, I mean no goggles when we learned to swim, no training wheels. We were tough. I mean, it was just you did it. And so I grew up with I don't know where to set this because I feel like everything up here is holy. I do. I go to I'm an Episcopalian, so there's no way I'm going to set it up here. Thank you. No, and so I grew up in a real binary, like you're either weak or you're strong. But the big binary I grew up with is you're either brave or you're afraid. And something, when I went through this whole spiritual awakening process in the middle of the research, there was a moment that was huge for me where I realized that you can be afraid and brave in the exact same moment. And the minute I realized that, my whole life changed. I was like, oh my God, because when I came out here, I felt brave and afraid in the exact same second. You know, everyone who puts a good idea on the table at work, brave and afraid in the exact same second. So to me, I don't feel like I have to choose anymore. I can think, oh my God, I'm going to throw up, and I'm so excited to do this. Yeah. So thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Brene. I really love your work as a therapist, researcher. Just love your work.
Thank you.
And I have a question. Today is National Coming Out Day, and so I just want to hear some of your wisdom or advice around how do we deal with the fact that the arena is not the same for everybody.
It's
so
not.
For a lot of lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer questioning people, and especially young people, that can be not just vulnerability but danger. And sometimes as a therapist, it's hard for me to negotiate not just being part of the community and knowing how it might feel to have that bit of connection, because I think whenever we choose to come out to somebody is really trying to even figure out if there can be a jar where we can put those marbles with somebody, and you really don't know until you make that bid for connection, and you can feel really disconnected and shut down in a lot of ways. And my heart really breaks sometimes when I'm like, sitting there with a 10-year-old or an 11-year-old or 12-year-old being themselves and being so incredibly courageous and knowing what the arena is going to look like for them. So just some of your thoughts about that. Thank you.
I have a lot of thoughts, and it's a great question, and I'm glad you asked it. It's one of the few situations that we face where walking into the arena can mean losing your family. It can mean losing the people you love, that you care about. And there's no question that when I walk into the arena, I'm being brave. But there's also no question that the arena door is a little bit wider for me, and the seats are not already stacked, because I'm straight, I'm white, I'm middle class, I'm educated, I'm Christian, and I represent majority culture in our country. And so there are critics in the seats. Most of the seats filled by the critics are me, looking back at me. But when you start talking about the GLBTQ community, when we start talking about race, when you start talking about ethnicity, when you start talking about the thing that we never talk about, which is class, the seats are stacked. And the stakes are so much higher. And so as a therapist, and I appreciate the work you do in that community, the painful work, the dark work, I think, is really about not only do you have the work of, do you have the courage to be vulnerable, do you have the courage to show up and be seen, but let's reality test what could happen when you just show up and be seen for who you are. And so to me, this goes back to my faith. This goes back to in my opinion, how dare we question the worthiness of people based on who they love? Like, to me, there's something deeply, really, like, I can't reconcile that with my Christianity. And so to me, when we talk about vulnerability and we talk about difference and we talk about who we are and identity, community matters so much in those situations. That we have a group of people who see us and love us and believe we're worthy of love and belonging. But I got to tell you that I would be BSing you, and I would never do that because you're boots on the ground in this community. That doesn't replace the loss of family love. We've got to get to a place in our culture where we see that differently. Thank you.
Brene, let's do one more.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hi.
All right.
Sorry. I know. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Well, they're bummed they can't ask. She's going to be here for a long time signing books, so you can talk to her.
Hi.
You've talked about your faith, and I wonder about your image of God being vulnerable. I mean, we're here with a vulnerable God. And my experience is when I share my vulnerability and someone else is doing that, that is holy ground. That is a sacrament, or that is the broken body of Christ. And what do you think about? Or how do you?
I think right on, dude. I think, yeah. No, I mean, yeah, I think exactly what you think. I think that is holy ground. Martin Buber, it's the quote that when two people connect with each other honestly and they look into each other's eyes, that's God. And I believe that. And I believe that, I think what I believe, and I think really the bottom of my Christian faith is that I can basically explain all my Christian faith with country western lyrics and rock lyrics and Leonard Cohen. Here's what I think. I think that there's a song by Leonard Cohen, the Hallelujah song, and there's a line in that says, "Love is not a victory march. It's a cold and broken hallelujah." And so I don't think vulnerability is a victory march. I think it's when we're with each other at our most broken, and we hold space for that. And I think that's God. That's what it looks like for me. Yeah.
Amen.
Amen. Yeah. Thank you.
Again, you can greet Brene out in the narthex. She'll be signing books. Before we head out there, though, I just want to give her the gift we give to all of our speakers, which is a plaque that says, with thanks to Brene Brown for bringing faith to life. We thank you so very, very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.